Well,
You're
he's
the
not
12th.
here,
He's
yes.
not here.
No,
Okay.
he's not here tonight.
He's at another university.
He's at Brandeis. We watch him like a hawk.
Okay. I'm sorry.
No, no.
Good to see you. I see
Nice.
you on.
Nice to see you, sir. Well, here we are, gathered together in communion, eating whatever that is. No. Pizza has never been one of my favorite foods, and I'm trying to learn not to like it again. And it's the young people seem to enjoy it, and I wish them well as they clog their arteries with this unbelievable dough. Well, enough of that. We're not here for that. Now, welcome to the forum. I'm Al Simpson, the director of the Institute of Politics. Great honor and privilege to do that. And my great honor to introduce the Spring Fellows at the Institute. A wonderful group, and this is my, well, I came here for a semester 3.5 years ago. It's much like Washington. You say, I'm going to Washington only for 6 months. I'm just going to there, and then I'll be gone. They're still there, all of them. And so for me and for Ann, it's been a wonderful 3.5 years. John Cowan is the Chief of Staff to, right here, to Secretary Andrew Cuomo at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, known to all of us as HUD. HUD. Now, John tells us that he is on leave from HUD.
That's right.
And that's what I said I did. You know? And you're going to be here 3.5 years? No, it's not. But he is the Chief of Staff. Now, you ask, or you may know what that means, but in Washington it has to do with remarkable responsibility and power. To influence policy at one of the largest of the federal agencies. It means responsibility for managing and motivating the entire staff at HUD. And it means stamina to keep up with Andrew Cuomo, I suppose, and I'm going to be debating his father next week in
Good luck.
San Francisco. Yeah, I'll need it. I always say he's the most eloquent man in America, but I say, Mario, where are the solutions? And that's what we'll debate. We'll have some fun. John is one of the youngest agency chiefs in the Clinton administration. He did have a life before HUD, and I was privileged to hear him testify at one of the hearings I held at one time. He co-founded and co-directed one of the nation's leading independent youth political action groups, Lead or Leave. And it was widely featured as a generational spokesman on Nightline, The Today Show, CNN, Time, Newsweek, Washington Post. From 90 to 92, he was press secretary and senior legislative aide to former Congressman Mel Levine of California. John is also an author. He'll never get any royalties. I knew that when I wrote my book. He is the co-author of The Revolution X, a book on politics for young people, and has written opinion pieces for the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and the Boston Globe, and is a graduate of Dartmouth. I think I was going to do you all. Now, you're all going to stick around, aren't you? You're not leaving early, because then I'll just maybe have Jonathan say a few words now, and then we'll go to the next one. Or I could introduce them all at once, and then come back for their 5 to 7 minutes. What's your preference? I see you have none. Someone raised their hand. Well, why don't you tell us? No, let me get them all out. The next one is Tom Fetzer, right here. He was elected mayor of Raleigh, North Carolina in 1993, the first, this is cheerful news, folks, the first Republican elected in that city's 200-year history. There's a smattering here. Always good. Hailed by the Wall Street Journal as the most impressive reform victory in the country. Tom was elected mayor twice more. He focused on reducing crime and taxes while improving city services. His efforts to improve education for the citizens of the city were marked by the establishment of community learning centers in public housing neighborhoods, which brought together educators, parents and community leaders to provide computer skills literacy, that in training and mentoring for children in those programs. He was the Republican nominee for Congress in 1988, and you can see it's in his blood. He now serves as the Vice President of the John Locke Foundation, a state public policy think tank, where he's also the Director of the Center for Local Innovations. He has launched a private nonprofit organization, private initiatives in education to develop more community learning centers in Raleigh, and also to award college scholarships to top students. He has a Bachelor of Arts in Politics from Wake Forest University. Our next fellow in the middle is Sam Fullwood. Sam is a journalist for the Los Angeles Times. He created a national race relations beat and contributed to the paper's 1992 Pulitzer Prize for spot news reporting for coverage of the Los Angeles riots. He is also an author, this new requirement for fellows. Additionally, his reporting on race, politics, and public policy led to his 1996 book, Waking from the Dream, My Life in the Black Middle. Since joining the LA Times as a Washington-based political correspondent, he's covered Congress, federal agencies, and domestic social issues, as well as presidential campaigns in 92 and 96. In 1985, he covered apartheid South Africa for the Baltimore Sun. He has reported and edited for the Charlotte Observer and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. His writings appear frequently in Essence, Emerge, Black Enterprise, Black Issues Book Review, as well as on National Public Radio's All Things Considered, PBS Washington Week in Review, and numerous others Washington-based political talk shows. Currently, he writes a monthly political column for Code magazine. Has a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism from the University of North Carolina, and during the 93-94 year, he was a Nieman Fellow here at Harvard. The next fellow, who hails from Bermuda, is the IOP first head of state to become a fellow. Pamela Gordon was first elected to Parliament in 1993 and became the first woman elected Premier of Bermuda in 1997. Currently, she serves as a leader of the opposition. Her political career began in '89 when she was appointed by the incumbent Premier to chair Bermuda's Youth Advisory Council and as a member of the Tourism Board. She was later appointed to the Bermuda Senate in '90. 2 years later, she was sworn in as the Minister of Youth, Sport and Recreation, and then Minister of the Environment, Planning, and Natural Resources. During her tenure as Premier, she focused on economic development and increasing Bermuda's international trade opportunities. She hosted in '98 the first meeting of chief ministers of the British Independent Territories in Bermuda, participated in the World Economic Forum in '98, and selected as a member of the Global Leaders for Tomorrow. She was a joint fellow with the Council of World Women Leaders, where she is a council member. She received a Bachelor of Arts and holds a Master's of Business Administration degree from Queen's University, also an LLD from the University of Brunswick, and she reads law at the University of London. I read law, but a lot of it didn't get down in there. And your last study group will include frequent field trips to Bermuda. No, that's not. That was I misspoke. And alphabetically, last but certainly not least, it is my great pleasure to introduce Roxanne Qualls. She was the first elected mayor of the city of Cincinnati in 1993. She served 3 terms until term limits forced her to the sidelines. Ms. Qualls was the first popularly elected mayor of Cincinnati. During her tenure, she focused on improving the city's neighborhoods through her Zero Tolerance Initiative, a campaign to take back our neighborhoods. The initiative targeted slum landlords, illegal dumping, and trash through the series of administrative and legislative changes. The United States Conference of Mayors recognized it in its best practices definition of categories in U.S. cities. She focused her efforts on maintaining the city as a vital core of the region by redeveloping the city's waterfront, using 2 new sports facilities as the anchors. Prior to her election to the City Council in '91, Roxanne served as the director of the Cincinnati office of Ohio Citizen Action. In that position, she led the successful effort to pass a local air code designed to address local air pollution problems. She began her career as the director of the Northern Kentucky Rape Crisis Center. She left that position to become executive director of Women Helping Women. Cincinnati is a glorious city. If you haven't been there for several years, you'll see her mark on that community. Roxanne Qualls attended Thomas More College and the University of Cincinnati. Now, John, tell these people how you got into this interesting place and what impelled you to be fascinated by public life.
Let's start with a quick story that probably sums up one of the things I most like about public life. In 1991, I had worked in Congress for a couple of years, and a good friend of mine and I decided that we were very frustrated, to put it mildly, that our generation was really sitting on the sidelines as we were watching our future get mortgaged. And frankly, there were few politicians in the country, save one who's sitting on this stage, who was really willing to take on some of the most difficult generational issues like the collapse of the Social Security system. So we started up a youth political group. We literally took $1,000 out of our own pockets, and we started up a group to mobilize young people. Took out a napkin, we were sitting having a beer, drew up a little game plan, and went at it. In the fall of 1992, we had been in existence about 2 months. We were pretty scrappy. We were getting young people involved, but it was still very much by the seat of our pants. We had formed a pledge campaign, and our pledge campaign was very simple. We were asking all congressional candidates and presidential candidates to take a pledge that they would promise to cut the federal budget deficit in half, which at that time was $300 billion a year, in half in 4 years, or they would voluntarily quit. Now, in retrospect, that seems quite easy. We're not running a deficit, we're running a surplus, but at the time, it seemed to most people impossible. And people said we were foolish, you'll never get anybody to take your pledge, that's ridiculous. We did start getting people to take our pledge, and in fact, in Georgia, the Republican challenger, we were a nonpartisan organization, the Republican challenger, a guy named Paul Coverdell, took our pledge and made a big deal out of it and had a press conference and talked about it all over the place. I've taken the Lead or Leave pledge. I'm promising to cut the deficit in half in 4 years or quit. I'm responsible. I'm accountable. The incumbent, Senator Weish Fowler, Democrat, is not being responsible. He's not willing to be accountable to future generations. It turned into a fairly big campaign issue. And we had a lobbying day that fall where we brought in young people from all over the country, and they went to each of their members' offices, congressmen and senators, and went to their offices and lobbied them, pushed them to take this pledge. Weish Fowler, the incumbent senator, was nice enough to see the group of about a dozen students or so who showed up and sat down, and they had a nice chat, and they talked about some of these issues, and Senator Fowler was very polite and very kind to them and listened. And then one of the students started pushing politely and said, we really want you to take this pledge. And they talked about that a little, and Fowler explained why he couldn't and why it wasn't possible to cut the deficit that much in 4 years, and I understand. And it was polite, but dismissive. Students started to push a little harder. And one of the students said, we really basically don't understand, Senator Fowler. We really need you to take this pledge. It's important for our generation's future. And Senator Fowler stood up, and he looked at the students, and he said, young people don't vote. You can kiss my ass. Which is not what you were taught in high school civics, was the kind of response you'd get from a United States senator. So the students, needless to say, were a little bit surprised and shocked. Fowler walked out of the room. They felt like their lobbying day was kind of over. They really weren't sure exactly what they were supposed to do after that. And they came back to our offices, very, very upset. What do we do? This is what he said. We're not sure. What, does this mean it's all over? What do we do? So my partner and I picked up the phone, and we called the bureau chief of Newsweek. Newsweek runs a column called Overheard, where they give, the famous quotes of the week. And we told him what had happened, and he called, as a responsible journalist would, he called Senator Fowler's office. And I don't know where Senator Fowler's press secretary was, or where Senator Fowler's chief of staff was, but the senator took the phone call himself and said to the managing editor, bureau chief, said, "They misunderstood me." And then he said some other things. But Newsweek decided that it's very hard to misunderstand "kiss my ass." Yeah.
Well, it's true.
Very hard. And they decided to run it. So they ran it. And all over Georgia, students showed up and young people showed up at Senator Fowler's events with signs saying, "Hey, Weish, kiss our ass. Students do vote."
Wow.
He lost in a runoff. Now, I'm not claiming that the only reason he lost in the runoff was because of a massive turnout of younger voters. But I do know that a couple months later, after Senator Fowler lost, one of our students, one of our employees actually, who's a young man, whose father is a columnist for the Boston Globe, was at a dinner with journalists, one of these big correspondence dinners, and his father happened to be seated next to Weish Fowler and happened to bring his son along, and his father introduced the son, and Senator Fowler turned and walked away when he found out that he worked for our organization, Leader Leave. That story, to me, goes to the core of why I love public life and why I love politics. Not because it's necessary to be irreverent, not because you should be rude to people, but because there are consequences. And what I've seen over the last 10 years or so of my life is that despite the fact that I am part of, and many of you here in this audience are part of, generations that for the most part have been ignored in the political system, that does not mean that we don't have a voice, and it doesn't mean that we can't make a difference. And what I've found tremendously rewarding about public life over the last decade or so is that if you're committed and you're passionate and you're willing to work hard at it, you can have a real impact, whether it's through an organization like the one I ran, or whether it's being chief of staff of a $30 billion a year, 9,000-person federal agency where you can see concrete change made every year. So to end my remarks, I'll say this. We were asked to mention something about our study group. What I want to do in my study group is two things. If you are already, or your friends are already engaged in politics, I want to teach you more. I want to bring in some of the best young people in the country who are making a difference, give you more of the skills, teach you more about being an effective player in the game of politics. If you are not engaged, if you volunteer because you think you get results there, but you're not engaged in politics because you think it's a waste of time or you can't really make a difference, I want to show you actually can make a difference. Whether it's through the White House, on a presidential campaign, through an advocacy group, I want to show you that you can really make a difference and prove that public life can have tremendous value for people in our generation.
Thank you very much. Tom Fetzer, if you could share with us some of the things that impelled you to involve yourself so deeply in the things you've done at this point in life.
We have just concluded a century of unparalleled technological advancement. It began in 1903 in my home state of North Carolina with the Wright brothers, for the first time in the history of this planet, breaking the boundaries of gravitational pull. And 66 short years later, with members of Orville and Wilbur Wright's immediate family still living, Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. A breathtakingly brief span of time for that kind of technological advancement to occur. In my own lifetime, 1955, the year I was born, Tradec built the first computer in the United States utilizing transistors. It had 800 of them, and it would have filled up a good portion of this room. Today, if you have a Pentium 2 chip in your PC, You can hold that thing on the end of your finger. It's got 7,500,000 transistors in it. Now, I don't understand what that means, but it's big. That's a big change. And the cost of those things is crashing. And all the other products that you have available to you is crashing. If you find an old catalog, you can find some old wireless telephones, first generation, that sold for $900. You can go buy a better phone at Walmart today for $995. Now, what's driven that is competition. In the first example, it was competition between warring countries over supremacy of air and later space. And in the second example, it was intense competition between American and global companies for customers. In this world today, if you're in business and you don't wake up and ask yourself three questions: who are my customers? What do they want and need? How do I deliver that as efficiently and economically as possible? Somebody's going to eat your lunch. I would defy you to provide examples of similar progression in the public sector along with concomitant cost crashes. It hasn't happened. We still have a Social Security system that's based on a 1930s model. In many communities, we have a trash collection system that's based on a medieval model. Public education in America is not as good as it was in 1948 when half the schools were one-room schoolrooms, because governments don't operate in an environment of competition. Private sector has customers, public sector has captives. If you live in my city of Raleigh, North Carolina, and you want water, police and fire protection, sewer, roads paid, you've only got one place to go: City Hall. So when I became mayor of Raleigh, it was with a passion to try and infuse into government the essence of competition, the dynamic that's made America the marketplace of the world. And so the first thing I did was I brought together volunteers, business people, small business people, large people in the city of Raleigh, and said, look, take 2 or 3 months, look at City Hall, find out things we're doing that we ought not to be doing, see the things we are doing that we ought to be doing better, see the things that need to be done that maybe somebody else could do better. And the net result of all of that was that after 6 years, we'd cut the property tax rate 4 times. We'd improved the overall quality and level of service delivery. We'd hired 250 new police officers, and crime was at a decade low. A lot of what we hear in this country is about reinventing government and making government more efficiency is just talk. A lot of it's not really happening. But if you want to look at the really dynamic and innovative laboratories for real change in government, it's happening at the local level. And I have a real passion about this, and part of my study group is to share with you some of the dynamic examples presented personally by the practitioners of their craft of really, truly innovative changes in American government and just local services. And I want to provide 2 examples real quickly. There's a private school in the heart of South Central Los Angeles, the Marcus Garvey School. It's a private school. You can go into a class there, and the student will be spelling words like exhaust and humidity. The teacher will call out 3-digit numbers, which they will add and subtract handily. The students will read from a history book about the beginning of civilization in Africa, about how it's the 2nd largest continent in the world. It has 12 million square miles. The first man was from Ethiopia. Flawless reading, no mistakes. This is a kindergarten class. 3-year-old preschoolers learn the alphabet in English and Swahili and can name the 50 states in the United States. 2nd graders are reading text used at Cal State Los Angeles. An 8-year-old named Amber can spell deinstitutionalization and know what it means. 4th graders are doing algebra. 6th graders doing calculus. These are kids that the world has told us are uneducable. And this is a school that receives no private funds, and its per pupil cost is a fraction of what public schools spend. An example of going outside the norm and doing something truly innovative. On the other side of the coast in Charleston, South Carolina, which is the South's oldest city, it's a charming place, but it can be terrifically waspishly snobbish. A black Jewish police chief has won the hearts of the people of Charleston by running criminals out of Charleston, in many instances without making any arrests. He shut down Charleston's open-air drug markets just simply by sending people in with cameras to take pictures of people. And something about people who buy drugs, they don't want their pictures taken, so they quit coming to buy drugs, and the dealers didn't have anybody to sell to anymore. These are just 2 of the examples you'll share in the study group that I plan to lead about really dynamic examples of innovation in local government. Boston's own Tip O'Neill said all politics is local, and I believe that. That's where change is really driven, because local government, being closest to the people, has to be more responsive. Most people don't have enough empirical information to decide whether their congressman is doing a good job or their senator is doing a good job. Lucky for you, Simpson. And, or whether their governor. But in local government, if the trash is piled up on the streets and the potholes aren't patched, you know whether local government is doing a good job or not. And increasingly, local government issues don't cleave along ideological boundaries. It's just about what works. People want local government that works. I accepted this gracious invitation to come here this spring for two reasons. One, this is, after all, one of the preeminent educational environments in this country, perhaps the Western world. If you don't think Harvard is the brand name for education, I'll show you the list of all the people in Raleigh who wanted me to bring them back Harvard sweatshirts. And secondly, I want to share with you my passion for local government, because if you really want to make a change in your world, if you want to make a direct and dramatic change in people's lives, local government is the environment to make that happen. And the time between identifying a problem, creating a solution, and implementing that solution can be refreshingly and rewardingly brief. Unlike other layers of government where the pace is glacial, in local government you can really make things happen, and you can make things happen quickly. And I also want to learn and be inspired from you. I've already encountered some very pleasant, inquisitive minds, and I think we're going to have a very challenging time, and I look forward to that.
Thank you very much. And now, Sam Fullwood, if you'd share some of your thoughts about your line of work and public life.
The last time I drew a distinction between myself and my fellow fellows in private, they chastised me for it. So I'm going to do it again. Of all the people up here, I'm the only one who is not elected to anything or worked for someone who has been elected to anything. And in fact, I somewhat bristle at the idea of being in public life. I am a journalist. And increasingly today, in the day of Geraldo and Oprah and Matt Drudge and CNN and you name it, it's the line between being a journalist and being a celebrity is vanishing. But I hold fast to the idea that there should be a bright red line that separates celebrityhood from journalism. And that journalists, when they do their craft best, basically are the same as you. They're citizens, and they are in conversation with fellow citizens about what's going on around them. And among the things that are most important about what's going on around us are the people who are in public life. My interest, my passion for journalism came purely by accident. My parents did not want me to be a journalist. My father is a retired Presbyterian minister who still lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. My mother, God rest her soul, was who is deceased now, was a elementary school teacher. And they were relatively simple, humble, albeit middle-class black Americans in Charlotte, North Carolina, when I, as a precocious 14-year-old, was chosen to be the editor of my high school newspaper. And nothing was the same in our house again. I learned that you could, in effect, snoop into other people's lives by writing stories and having them appear in my high school newspaper. But I still didn't think of that as a real career. Maybe I wanted to be president, maybe I wanted to be an actor, maybe I wanted to be Willie Mays, I don't know. I wanted to do something, but journalism hadn't really been it. As fate would have it, on August 9th, 1974, does anybody know what that date was? Right. I happened to be the copy boy at my hometown newspaper, the Charlotte Observer. If anybody knows what a copy boy is, there aren't any anymore. They're now, what is a copy boy? Yeah, I used to think of it as about the closest form of insect life in a newsroom. Essentially, my job was to go in as a high school graduate to have someone yell, "Hey, boy," and to rush over to where they were and take their sheets of paper back to the composing room where the semi-literate composing types would turn that into templates that would be the paper the next day. It was a heady experience, and it was one after about 3 weeks that I decided that I did not want to do. The other main job that a copy boy had was to fetch coffee for everybody. And that was something that I never could get right because this guy wanted it black, that person wanted it with cream, that person wanted it with 2 sugars, and I just gave it to them the way I wanted them to have it, which ultimately meant that someone else was yelling at me. And in those days, before political correctness, the yelling was also accompanied by all kinds of slurs and curses. So I decided that this wasn't what I wanted to do until August 9th, 1974. I came to work about 5 o'clock, and one of my colleagues, who was a copy boy, said, "You better grab a sandwich and a Coke now because they've told us no one's going to leave for lunch later." So I went over to where the sandwiches were, and just by accident, I happened to see the next morning's paper, and it said in 60-point type, stretched across the top, "Nixon resigns." Well, Nixon hadn't resigned yet. So I went over to the managing editor and said, "You know what the headline's going to be tomorrow?" And he says, "Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've got the full text of his resignation. Some reporters are working on it. We're going to have photographers from Washington. This puppy is already put to bed." It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And a light bulb, it was one of those aha reactions, went off over my head. These people, at that point I didn't know who Woodward or Bernstein was. I marginally knew that there was a Washington Post. But I knew that the people in a newsroom had some way of knowing what was going to happen before the rest of the people in that town. And I decided that if I got cursed out every day for not getting coffee right, if I had to curry copy all around the room, I too wanted to be among those people who knew what was going on and communicating that to the rest of the world before it was old news. Flash forward about 20 years later. After having worked at my hometown newspaper, deciding that I wanted to move off and see some of the world, it's 1985, and I am landing on a plane in Johannesburg, South Africa. Apartheid was still the law of the land in that very oppressed country. And I, never having been out of the country before, am in the middle of, by all definitions, a racist regime. My job in South Africa as the bureau chief for the Baltimore Sun was to essentially be a glorified police reporter, bouncing from one urban or rural or Bantustan disturbance, which was really riots, and reporting about what I actually saw, because so many people in the United States, so many young people on college campuses, I'm sure many people right here on this campus and at my alma mater at the University of North Carolina, and so many other places, had begun to raise their voices about the apartheid regime. And so Americans were interested in knowing more, and it was my job to write about many of the atrocities that we now know from history books about what was going on in South Africa. But I had a number of experiences while I was there, and probably one of the most profound, as I recall it, was going out and being in the middle of a riot, being tear gassed, seeing the Afrikaner police fire tear gas into the Regina Mundi Church in Soweto, where only little old ladies and children were in praying. And writing about this, and then being hauled the next day before the police who had seen my story and wanted to know why was I printing lies for the Americans, to stir up trouble in America. And another light bulb went off in my head, that when people do not know what's going on around them, all kinds of bad things can happen. Bad policy can be created. Even apartheid governments can exist. I recently heard Bishop Tutu talk about his experience of how South Africa was transformed. And he said the worst part about what was going on there in those days was that the good people in the country did not know, and it was easy for them to not believe because there was no one to tell them. The media was essentially silenced or muzzled or banned, and such that people could not communicate. That's the reason I think that the media, in its manifold complexity, is so important. That's the reason I believe that our system, with its First Amendment and its freedom of the press protections, is so vitally important to create an educated and informed citizenry. As a reporter now, I write a great deal about race, and that's why I wanted to create a study group that sort of examines the interaction between race, popular culture, and public policy. And I think that there is a direct line between all of those, that often policy is driven by either people's knowing or their ignorance about how media and how information is disseminated to them. So over the next 8 weeks, 7 or 8 weeks, I expect to bring in some very important, some very articulate, some very interesting people who will examine this subject of popular culture. We'll learn a little bit about how the language of sports, for example, is now the language of urban America, which in other words is the language of the black neighborhood and the black playground and basketball courts. We'll hear about rumor and how rumors circulate and take on a form of their own, and many people base even their voting choices based on bad information from rumor, which is so easy now to be disseminated with the internet. Anybody who has access to a computer today is the equivalent of a newspaper publisher. And that so that rumor, bad information, can be disseminated out, and if someone is willing to believe it, they can judge and base their actions on that. And we're going to discuss that a little bit. Those are two of the classes, or two of the seminar discussion groups that I look forward to sharing with many of you, and I look forward to the dialogue that we'll have in talking about the interactions of popular culture, race, and our media.
Thank you very much. Now, Pamela Gordon, if you'd share some thoughts and your observations.
Thank you, Alan. Well, first of all, I want to tell you that I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to come here and to interact with the young people at Harvard and the not so young people, because we hear about people from the community who make this a very rich opportunity for us to interact. My involvement in politics was such that some in my community expected it, because my father was to Bermuda what Martin Luther King was to the United States. They celebrate his birthday. The only interesting thing, though, is that my father was the labor rights leader, and his daughter, however many years later, got involved in conservative government. Now, that confused many people, because obviously when you come from a family, there is a particular expectation that you support whatever your family supports. And the difference was, in my family, we were raised to understand that you don't follow blindly. You do things, you participate, you learn, you listen. And then when you are able to form an opinion, know that that opinion matters. Know that you've made a decision because you believe it is the right thing to do, not because that's what your mom said it was okay to do, or your father said that's what you must do. It was something that you had to feel in your heart of hearts. And so, at the risk of having all of the name calling and all of the negative things and being a woman to boot, I decided to make a lot of noise when the then premier did some things in relating to our young people, because I felt we were losing too many of our young people in our community. And so I knew him very well. He, was a family friend, and I always used to go and complain to him. You're not doing this right, and you're not doing that right. And he was like, okay, what would you recommend? And he was polite for a while, and then one day he just had enough, and he said, I am so sick of people like you. Oh dear, what do you mean? And he says, well, you all sit on your sidelines, and you're prepared to criticize, to complain, but you're not prepared to get involved and make a difference. He says, you don't like the way things are? You get involved, fix it. You change it. You do something that's going to make this whole thing worthwhile so that you will feel that the contribution that you make has helped to make a difference in the country in which you live. And I thought, oh, okay, so I'll show you. And that was in 1989, and I decided to run in the election, and I will tell you that it's a very interesting dynamic in a country where it's 72% black and 28% white, where there's an expectation that if you are black, you should be a supporter of the Labor Party. And if you're not, you are every name in the book except a child of God. They can call you all kinds of names. And so people's perceptions of who you should be led to a lot of the challenges that we had. But perseverance played out, and I was able to stay involved and became, as was said earlier, senator, became a minister of government. But most of all, I was tenacious. I stayed the course. I was involved because I was committed to trying to make things better. And it was an interesting time because we had a scenario that was going on, that we had a male premier. And about 10 years ago, quite honestly, the thought of having a woman leader of the country was just not on. And I think all of you can identify with that in America. Because in this country, there's still the issue of gender difference. People don't look as much as at the contribution a person can make and how valid they are in their ability to make that contribution. You're first viewed as either if you're male, what's your pedigree, what kind of contribution they believe that you can make based on the connections you have, as opposed to the sincerity that people can bring to the office. And so I just set about trying to make a difference the best way that I could. And so the rest is history, because I did the job, and I did it to the best of my ability. And I think I bring to the study group a wealth of information, a wealth of I would say, a direction that the United States of America has yet to arrive at. And I also feel that the one benefit that I could possibly help in the study groups is to offer an alternative in relation to the fact that in America, sometimes you don't always have to be first in deciding how you're going to do something. Sometimes it doesn't hurt to take on the information from others, take their learning, take their experiences, and learn from them. And so I'm looking forward to the study groups because I would like the ability to interact. I want to listen to why so many young people are fixed in their political positions so early in their lives. I want to understand, is it as a result of either being hereditary? Is it something that you've been forced to do? Is it something that you feel that it is out of necessity? Because I think based on the information that you will impart with me, it will help me to better understand why Americans feel the way that they feel, when I can also impart to you what it means to come from a small country, but to have the perception that people are people, and not to judge women based on their gender, but based on their ability. Recognizing that a strong economy is first and foremost, because if you have a strong economy and you have stability, then obviously other things can stem from that. You can have all the social programs that you would like if you have a stable environment. But without that, you can have a very difficult, extremely challenging time. And you don't need a large country like America to be able to pan that out. You can look at a small place like Bermuda. And so I feel that our examples of what has happened in a place like Bermuda. Looking at the fact that even though we are 60,000 strong, our per capita income is greater than that of the United States. Our gross domestic product is such that we're very proud, and we look at it from the standpoint that we have twin pillars of our economy, recognizing that you cannot always survive off of that, and so therefore we have to always be forward moving and thinking. Initially, Bermuda was strong on its tourism, and then we realized that tourism, like everything else, has a life cycle. So we went from tourism into international business. That became the second pillar of our economy, and that presents about 50% of our GDP. But now we're looking at e-commerce and trying to create a technology park for Bermuda, making Bermuda a more user-friendly place because of our regulatory environment, that we have been able to entice businesses to Bermuda. We are not a tax haven, as many people believe we are. We are tax neutral. And to help to explain what a tax neutral environment is and how people can set up a business and do well. So that is I would say, a snapshot of what our discussion groups will be about. And really, for me, it will be an opportunity to hear more, to listen more, to get a feel for what makes all of you tick, to find out not so much about our differences, but about our similarities. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Roxanne Falls, the mayor of Cincinnati,
Thank you, Al.
Queen City of Plains. No,
The Queen City of the West.
the West.
The
I
West.
got
That's
it
Longfellow's
right.
poem. Any of you who are not familiar with Longfellow. Well, good evening. And first of all, even though this violates everything you ever learn about public speaking, I have to first apologize for my voice. And hopefully none of you will come down with the flu, as I came down with it over the weekend. But let me just briefly tell you about why I got involved in public life, what made me then make a decision to actually run for elective office, and then what the study groups are about. I got involved in public life for two reasons. One is that I was raised in a family that really put a particular emphasis upon a sense of duty, of civic responsibility, and perhaps some of that had to do with the fact that my father was in the Air Force. He was an officer in the Air Force before he retired. But there was a sense that one doesn't just simply lead one's life to one's private and personal satisfaction, but that whatever choice you make in terms of your work or your career, you make that choice in an attempt personally to find meaning, but secondly, to really make a difference in the life of your community. And that sense was reinforced by the schools I attended, and at that time, in the 1960s and 1970s, a heavy emphasis within, I think, the community in general, but particularly within the religion I was raised in, which was Roman Catholicism, of really working for social justice. And so it turned out that I kind of fell into my first real work in the world, and it might be an experience that some of you have, and that is I needed a job. And the job happened to be something that I was interested in doing, and it also happened to be something that I thought was very important. And that was working in an organization called the Northern Kentucky Rape Crisis Center. They needed someone who was willing to work for cheap, and I was willing to work for cheap for an organization that actually was making a difference in the lives of women and children who were victims of sexual assault and abuse. I did that work for a number of years, both at the Rape Crisis Center as well as Women Helping Women. But it wasn't until I became director of the Cincinnati office of an organization called Citizen Action, Ohio Citizen Action, that I even began to think about actually elective office. And the reason I finally decided to run for elective office was because the work I was doing was with local neighborhood organizations who were trying, in a variety of instances, to either prevent a garbage incinerator from being built in their neighborhood, a neighborhood that literally was the chemical corridor of the city of Cincinnati, or working with a neighborhood that was trying to get an old chemical company to clean up what were nothing but toxic cesspools of chemicals sitting in lagoons on the site next to where they lived and where they were trying to raise their children. I had the benefit of working from 1985 until 1991 with most of the neighborhoods who were trying to organize themselves in response to pollution issues in whatever form those issues took. And so it was one of the few people in the city that really had what we like to refer to as a strategic overview, who kind of had a larger picture. And that larger picture really made it clear that we had to see some changes in local legislation if we were going to actually have any sort of tools that were needed by the communities to try to go after some of the companies that were the worst actors. And so over the period of about 2 years until 1991, I worked not just with individual neighborhoods, but with coalitions of neighborhoods and coalitions of environmental groups for Cincinnati to pass a local air code. But it was during those negotiations with the council members of the city of Cincinnati over the specifics of the legislation that it became really clear to me, and this is, as I have said to many people, an experience that many of the people later on in my career as an elected official probably had when they were sitting in front of me, trying to talk to me as mayor. My experience then, when I was on the other side of the table, was, I can do your job, and I can do it better than you're doing it. Because I understand the issues. I understand actually what you're reading, and you don't. Because I understand the issues. And so I'm going to run for office. And when I made that decision, it was a pretty tough decision because I came from Northern Kentucky, not Cincinnati, Ohio. Doesn't have any family connections. Wasn't a big name. Wasn't well connected in terms of money circles. And so basically had to run 3 times before I was even elected. Ran in 1987 and lost, ran in 1989 and lost, and finally in 1991, I won, and I was elected to city council. And that was great. The establishment, when I was elected to city council, literally thought that the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse were entering the city council's chambers because I was perceived by the establishment as extremely radical. Now, if you're familiar with Cincinnati, what you realize is that there's a spectrum, and there's a broad definition of what's radical and what's conservative. But within my community, because of working so, I would like to think, effectively with neighborhoods, I was viewed as very radical. And then in 1993, I was elected mayor. And if people thought that the 4 horsemen had entered the council chambers, many people thought civilization as they had come to know it was ending on the day that I was sworn into office. What I found, however, when I became mayor was that the challenge that's presented to the mayor is very different than the challenge that's presented to a community organizer or to a member of city council, because if no one else in the city maintains an overview and a vision of what the city could be and what needs to happen, if no one other than the mayor does, the mayor has to do that. And so what I found during my 6 years as mayor is that the question I always ended up having to ask was, what is truly in the long-term best interests of the city? And that, as Tom was mentioning, there's not necessarily a conservative or a liberal way to approach certain basic issues. Even though I'm sure as our fellowship continues, we're going to find that we're going to disagree on a number of items. But the point is that there really isn't. And what you have to look at are the immediate needs of your community and balance them against the long-term needs that you have to deal with as every city is trying to respond to this new global economy. And so as my voice is giving out, I will conclude on my study group is going to look at those issues that are really shaping cities. And it's going to look at the complexity of those issues so that you can't take a really simple-minded or simplified approach anymore to how do you prioritize what's important? Is it homelessness versus stadiums? Well, what I found is that you can't frame the issues that way anymore. That if anything, the hardest challenge to local government is that you have both issues to deal with. You have to figure out how you prioritize your resources and at times develop new resources. And then you have to make decisions that usually please no one, but hopefully in the end will actually pay off for the entire community and your constituents. Thank you.
Well, there you are. There's a remarkable group of fellows. This is my fourth crop that I have watched grow, and I tell you, this is a fertile crop. I think this is a marvelous group, and it would be a shame if you didn't come to enjoy them and to join them and engage them, because I think they're ready for that, especially to young people. I try to say it all the time. You were banging the doors. You remember the senator, too, that said, if we don't balance the budget during my term, I'm going to quit. Well, it didn't happen, and he said, well, it didn't get done, but I don't want to quit. But he did quit for 2 years, and then he came back in. Very interesting man from North Dakota, and a good senator. But anyway, I keep saying, take part or get taken apart. They don't listen, but important to say it. Take part or get taken apart. And then, of course, see some guy the other day said, hey, who speaks for us? He's quoting Beavis and Butthead, and it was a strange thing. and Snoopy Poop Dog or something. I never did it. Anyway, I said, well, you have to learn to speak for yourselves. Because, we gave you the right to vote, and only 20% of the 18-year-olds use the right to vote. That's absurd. And I can tell you, or I try to tell them, that if they don't get, not just the intergenerational, but just get in the game, get wet all over, because there are people who don't care about your generation. And they're not evil. They just aren't paying attention. They're interested in themselves and their own stability and their own, what's going to happen to me. And it's very real. And I know you'll help me crush the AARP. 33 million Americans bound together with a common love of airline discounts. And we want to try to get them at every turn. Well, that's just one of my causes. And I always used to say, people would come up and whine, and I'd say, do you vote? No, I don't vote. I say, great. Just give them the bird and get out of there. Because if you don't vote, what should the politician care about you at all? At all. And that's pretty heavy stuff, but that's where Weiss, and he was a good egg. He was a fellow here. He got, I think he was. No, he was. He came here, and he said, I learned so much. I mean, I learned the power of young people. And then old John, lead or leave, yeah. Anyway, I think you can see another strain in these people. These people, persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. It's not how much intelligence, it's not how much this or, native this or that. It's persistence and determination. And that's what I see here. But thank you very much, and we'll look forward to your study groups, and your liaisons will be out there whipping them up, and you'll have some great times. And thank you so much for being here, and just a very impressive group. Thank you.
Unbelievable.
I had forgotten what he said.
Yes, yes, mine.
And I read it, and I thought, I knew why. No, I didn't. Yeah, I knew that.